Sometimes I look at a modern city and wonder when it first decided the surface was not enough. I keep picturing London in the 1960s, where the future feels close enough to touch. But when I sit down to write, my mind keeps travelling to an earlier moment, to Victorian London, and to the day people agreed to dig a railway under the street. So let's go down into the first underground and the astonishing confidence it took to build a city twice. By the middle of the 19th century, London had grown into a sprawling metropolis with a serious problem. 7 major railway stations ringed the outer edges of the city, but not a single line crossed through the heart of London itself. Every day, thousands of people and endless loads of goods poured into these termini, only to spill onto streets never designed to handle such chaos. Horse-drawn coaches ground to a crawl through congested thoroughfares, creating traffic jams that would put modern rush hour to shame. The city desperately needed a solution. Following that, a determined city solicitor, Charles Pearson, refused to accept that London was stuck with its gridlock. So in 1845, Pearson began championing what seemed like a wild idea. He proposed the idea of building a railway underneath the city's streets. Most people thought he was mad. The very notion of tunnelling beneath London's foundation seemed both dangerous and absurd. But Pearson had an ace up his sleeve. Just 2 years earlier, in 1843, Marc Brunel had successfully completed the Thames Tunnel, proving that it was possible to dig beneath London without the whole city collapsing. This gave Pearson's dream just enough credibility that to be taken seriously. It still took nearly a decade of lobbying and negotiations before Pearson finally won his battle. In 1854, Parliament officially authorised his grand plan. The Metropolitan Railway would run from Bishop's Road at Paddington all the way to the city, following the route of the New Road, which we now know as Marylebone Road and Euston Road. Finally, London would have its underground connection. As the approval was secured, the real work could begin. In March 1860, construction crews broke ground on what would become the world's first underground railway. The method they used was called cut and cover, which sounds simple but was brutally disruptive. Workers dug enormous trenches right down the middle of busy streets, excavating deep into the earth while trying not to disturb the gas mains, water pipes and sewers that crisscrossed beneath the surface. They then built sturdy brick tunnels inside these trenches, laid down the tracks, and finally covered everything over with brick arches before putting the street back on top. The trench initially ran from Paddington toward King's Cross, carving its way beneath the new road. Teams of navvies laboured around the clock in dangerous conditions, carefully shoring up foundations and navigating around underground utilities. Near King's Cross, they had to dig an especially deep tunnel under Mount Pleasant. As they pushed further toward Farringdon, the engineers made a clever discovery. They could repurpose part of the old Fleet River sewer culvert as a ready-made tunnel. This allowed them to go deeper in some sections without completely tearing up the street above. The construction was not without its costs. Thousands of houses along the route had to be demolished to make way for the railway, displacing entire communities and leaving a visible scar across Victorian London. By late 1862, after more than 2 years of relentless work, the Metropolitan Railway was essentially finished. Government inspectors arrived to examine the new railway, ordering a few final adjustments. Then came the grand opening. On January 10, 1863, a celebratory banquet was held at King's Cross Station, and the Metropolitan Railway officially opened to the public. Tragically, Charles Pearson never got to see this moment. The man who had fought for decades to make the Underground Railway a reality had died the previous year, just months before his vision came to life. Critics had nicknamed the railway the Drain, meaning that the Londoners would never descend into dark tunnels beneath the earth. They could not have been more wrong. On opening day, somewhere between 30,000 and 38,000 people crowded onto the platforms, eager to experience this marvel. They boarded wooden carriages lit by flickering gaslights, which were then hauled through the tunnels by steam locomotives. The experience was smoky and cramped, but it worked brilliantly. In the first year alone, the Metropolitan Railway carried approximately 9.5 million passengers. In one bold stroke, London had created an entirely new layer of transportation beneath its streets. The Metropolitan Railway's stunning success immediately sparked expansion plans. In 1864, the Metropolitan extended a short branch westward to Hammersmith, which would eventually become part of what we now call the Hammersmith and City Line. Not to be outdone, a competing company launched London's second underground line in 1868. The District Railway opened, running from South Kensington to Westminster using the same cut-and-cover method, and it connected to the Metropolitan at South Kensington so trains could share tracks. Throughout the 1870s, both companies raced to extend their lines. City financiers, seeing the potential for an integrated network, began scheming to close the loop. By 1884, their vision became reality when the Metropolitan's southern extension, which had reached the Tower of London in 1882, connected with the district's eastern arm. Together they formed a continuous circle line that completely encircled central London, linking all the major railway termini and uniting what had once been a fragmented collection of isolated rail networks. As impressive as these cut-and-cover tunnels were, they had their limitations. They could only run so deep without destroying the streets above, which meant engineers could not easily tunnel beneath the densest parts of the city or under the Thames. But by the late 1880s, new technology offered a solution. In 1886, railway planners hired a brilliant young engineer, James Greathead. Greathead had perfected a revolutionary cylindrical iron tunnelling shield that allowed workers to dig safely in a protected chamber while lining the tunnel with iron segments as they advanced. This technique made it possible to construct stable circular tubes deep underground without disturbing the surface. Using Greathead's shield, the City and South London Railway opened in 1890 as the world's first deep-level electric tube railway. It ran from Stockwell under the Thames to King William Street, and instead of smoky steam locomotives, it used clean electric trains. For the first time, passengers could board sleek electric carriages on platforms deep beneath the city streets. Contemporary illustrations show well-dressed Victorian Londoners marvelling at these futuristic electric trains. The success of deep tube technology opened the floodgates for new railway proposals. In 1890, Parliament approved plans for a new deep-level line running from Bank to Shepherd's Bush, which would become the Central London Railway. By 1900, both the City and South London Railway and the Central London Railway were fully operational, establishing the narrow, deep tunnel design that would define the London Tube for generations to come. The dawn of the 20th century brought not just new tunnels, but a complete technological transformation. Initially, only the new deep tubes had embraced electric power, while the older Metropolitan, District and Circle lines still relied on steam locomotives that filled their tunnels with thick smoke. That changed dramatically in 1905, when all three lines finally replaced their steam engines with electric multiple-unit trains. Overnight, the air cleared, service improved dramatically, and passengers could finally breathe easy. Much of this modernisation came courtesy of Charles Tyson Yerkes. He was an ambitious American financier who arrived in London around 1900. Yerkes took control of several struggling tube companies and consolidated them into the Underground Electric Railways Company of London. He poured enormous sums into completing new deep-level lines, including extensions of the Piccadilly and Bakerloo lines, and drove the wholesale electrification of the existing network. By 1907, his vision of a unified, fully electric underground system was rapidly becoming reality, transforming from independent steam railways into an integrated electric network that would serve London for the next century and beyond.
Whenever I imagine the first underground, I do not picture a neat diagram or a polished platform.
Somewhere near the end, someone laid the last arch brick, and the city became layered. I cannot stand there in 1863 and watch that moment with my own eyes, but every time I imagine it, I understand why it mattered.
If this video made you feel like you were right there during the construction,
make sure to subscribe and like. And if there's a different period you'd like to step into, tell me in the comments. I read them all, and your suggestion might be the next journey we take beneath the surface of history.